think organized for the invitations and a big conference. Everything I want to talk about today is with joint work with Mark Hagan and Alessandro Sisto. Okay, so we've already heard a couple of talks on the hyperbolic spaces and groups. I don't really want to dwell on the general theory because it's already been done in a nice way. But just to remind you, the goal of today's talk is to describe a boundary theory for these objects and to remind you what objects are in play here. Hyperbolic spaces are to the end or any products of hierarchical hyperbolic spaces. Pi 1 of the compact special cubulating groups versus rags. Pi 1 of closed three manifold groups without Miller stall and their prime decompositions. And then in particular, mapping class groups type or space with either metric. Now, what I really want to focus on today is the mapping class group because some of the most interesting applications we have for this boundary come here. Okay, so Ruth already defined for us the Gromov boundary. So I want to not really dwell on the definition, but just remind you of some of the nice consequences of this. So X is a proper hyperbolic metric space. Then there's this Gromov boundary, and the Gromov boundary continues the union with the base space. It's nice compact in my triangle. And this is really nice, and you can do all sorts of things. And well, one of the goals with this project was to, so generalize the Gromov boundary and then try to do some of the things you do with Gromov. Let me remind you what some of these things are. And I'm going to focus on the case of a group, hyperbolic group. Okay, so the first thing you really want to do is classify elements. The dynamics of the boundary. We already saw this a little bit in Dennis's talk, his first talk. We want to be able to analyze, use it to analyze structures of subgroups. So the Gromov boundary is always a model for the Poisson boundary. Boundary for random walks on the group. And then there's also these questions of Ken and Thurston type maps. So you have a nice hyperbolic subgroup. When does the inclusion map extend continuously to embedding of the boundary, or not embedding, but just a map from the boundary of the subgroup into the boundary of the ambient group. So I'm going to spend a lot of time in the talk focusing on questions of this nature. And then maybe a couple other things you can do, which are, at this point, things we like to do maybe. You can define a theory of geodesic flows on the group. And you can also study how to study solving measures. And answer common type questions. Okay, so you've seen from the plan, the goal, I will eventually tell you what we can do of these things, but the first thing to do, I think, is to just define the boundary for you. And I'm going to focus on the case of the mapping class group, because once the one I understand the best, then there's all this, and you can draw pictures, and that makes understanding better for everyone, I think. So this fits as a finite type surface, as we've seen what is a hierarchically hyperbolic space or group? It's this space which has all these domains, you might call them, and then for each domain you have a collection of hyperbolic spaces. And for us, these domains are going to be subsurfaces, and the hyperbolic spaces are going to be curved graphs. Let me just mention this down. I don't know how to really draw a fancy S, so I'm just going to draw this. So whatever this is it's going to be the collection of domains, and these are just going to be subsurfaces, essential subsurfaces of my favorite, or my parent surface, S. Into each one of these guys, I'm going to associate some hyperbolic metric space curve graph. And this has been mentioned many times, and but still should be mentioned. The theorem of Bazin-Minsky that C of y is a Gromov hyperbolic. What also do we need? For each y, we also have a notion of subsurface projection, and Brian talked about this last time, and I guess I should pause at the beginning and say if you want to think about things in terms of the marking graph that Brian defined, then that makes life really great, because then everything's in terms of curves, and then what are the subsurface projections? I take my curves, and just look what they look like on the subsurface, and that's what I get. So there are these subsurface projections, which go from the mapping class group down to the curve graph. This is the subsurface projection. And what we saw in Brian's last. Okay. There were, from both Alex and Jason's talk, we saw that there are three relations here. I'm going to focus mainly on one, because for our purposes this will be the most important one, but let me remind you what they are. The relations on this wiggly thing. The first one is nesting. And here this is going to be subsurface inclusion. I should point out that it's a partial order. With a bounding length spins. And the bound on this length is going to be really useful for us, because at some point we're going to want to make some sort of inductive argument. We'll pass to a subsurface, and pass to a subsurface, and pass to a subsurface, and eventually want that thing to stop. And the bound here is just the complexity of the surface. Cool. So another one is transversality. I guess I should draw a picture. So I said I can focus on mapping class first, because then I can just focus on nice pictures. And so here's, say, x. Here's y. And then y sits inside x. So transversality here, this is going to be coming from interlocking. And I'll draw a picture. Draw my favorite surfaces again, except for now I'm going to take the opposite here. So I want this guy to be x, and this guy to be y. And you see that they have this subsurface in common. X and y intervals. This most important one is disjointness, which is called orthogonality, but this is disjointness. And here I don't even need to, I could have not drawn a more complicated surface, but my two lines punctured tori here. That's a wire disjoint. Hopefully this is not so familiar. Okay. All right. right, so I think both Alex and Jason mentioned that when you have disjoint domains, say disjoint subsurfaces, in the mapping class group or any HHG or HHS, you see these product regions. Okay. So, when we just generally say if Y is some subsurface, then it determines the product region. And it's quasi-isometric to the product of two lower complexity HHGs, HHSs. And I'm forgetting which is F and which is E, because there's so much notation. What's
F is the real guy and E is the complement.
Thank you. I thought that would have been true. Okay, so here, in the mapping class group case, I want to just think about Y as a subsurface, and I say, hey, I take my let's call this guy Y, and up here I'm thinking about Y as this punctured. I'm going to reduce this thing to a puncture, and so what does it see? It just sees stuff that lives on this subsurface. And that's really what's happening here. So this guy here is going to be, well, you should think of it as a marking graph, maybe. But it's going to be quasi-isometric to, say, a Cayley graph of Y. This guy over here, though, is just all the things that are disjoints from it. And it turns out that, well, in this case, we have this big subsurface here, but then we also have a curve here. So this guy here, we can be quasi-isometric to, we call this C, and we call this alpha. Then this guy can be quasi-isometric to Cayley graph for Z times some copy of the integers, which is this coming from twisting around alpha. Okay. So what's the point? The point is that this product region embeds inside of the mapping class group. And as you can see, I have a lower dimensional mapping class group, and so this is some big infinite diameter product region. And this is a big flat in this space, but I just want to make a comment right here. What's actually happening at the level of the curve graph as a whole? Well, if I just think about this as the marking graph for Y, then I just have curves sitting on here, on these curves sitting here. And each one of these curves is disjoint from my boundary curve, alpha. So in the curve graph, if I look at what this product region looks like, it's actually just going to be in a bounded diameter neighborhood, or actually the one neighborhood of this curve alpha in the curve graph. Another way of putting that is that if I look down in the curve graph, and on the whole surface, and I look down at the projection of this whole product region, with my subsurface projection, I get this bounded diameter neighborhood. A bounded diameter. So one way of thinking about this is if I'm moving through my product region in some reasonable way, and the curve graph is not really moving around. I want to do a thought experiment now, which is a dangerous thing. We want a boundary, if the boundary is geometrically defined, then it's really some way to encode the asymptotics of moving around in your space. And in a hierarchically hyperbolic group or in the mapping class group, there's, well, in geodesics, you can't really get a handle on them. And maybe the best way to think about moving around hyperbolic space is via hierarchy paths. So a hierarchy path, I'm not going to give you a technical definition. Hierarchy path, gamma is just some mapping to say the mapping class group is quasi-geodesic such that if I look down to any subsurface, the subsurface projection of this quasi-geodesic, I get an unparameterized quasi-geodesic for any domain, for any any subsurface. Well, let me kind of take these last two comments that I made, put them together. But moving around a product region, then in a curved graph that contains my subsurface, so if I'm moving around a product region corresponding to y, this comment that I made that, well, that whole product region projects to a bounded diameter neighborhood in the curved graph of S, well, that in fact holds for any subsurface that contains y. So if I'm moving around a product region for y, then I'm not moving in any subsurface that contains y. If I'm moving along a hierarchy path, then all my projections go down to unparameterized quasi-geodesics. And so we can kind of just say that the way that hierarchy paths move through the space is that they move in and out of product regions. And when they're not moving through product regions, you just don't move in you don't move in those curve graphs coming from those product regions. Now this is somewhat vague, but I think the thought experiment has to be a little bit vague. Right. So here's the thought experiment. I want to imagine that I'm moving along a hierarchy path, out toward infinity. I kind of have two options. I can either get stuck in a product region for all my life, or for most of my life. I move to that product region and I get stuck there for the rest of my life. And if that happens, then what happens is I'm moving through this product, and I can think about, well, I'm just moving in these components separately, and whatever I'm doing in the individual components doesn't really determine anything about what I'm doing in the other components. So then I should think, well, okay, fine, I'm going to project down my hierarchy path to what's happening on this lower complexity thing. And then look what's happening there. I may be moving through, so I'm looking what's happening in the curve graph of y, or in the mapping class group of y, the marking graph of y. When I'm moving through y, well, maybe I get stuck in a product region there, or maybe I don't, and maybe I just move on forever in this product region for y without ever getting stuck in some lower complexity product region. And that'll tell me that I'm moving to infinity in the curve graph of y. If I'm moving to infinity in the curve graph of y as a quasi-geodesic, I get a point in the boundary. I'm going to reiterate this. I start moving along a hierarchy path, but I don't get stuck in the product region. I project down to the curve graph. I get an unparameterized quasi-geodesic in the curve graph, and that determines the point in the boundary of the curve graph. This is a hyperbolic space, and every quasi-geodesic determines an asymptotic class, which is how you define the boundary. Alright, so if that doesn't happen, then I get stuck in some product region, and I just project down to these factors, and I look in their curve graphs, and if I don't get stuck in a product region, then I head out to infinity, and I get boundary points in those curve graphs coming from those subsurfaces. And then if I do get stuck in a product region, then I just project down inside of those product regions and keep looking. And finite complexity tells me that at some point I stop. And what am I left with? I'm left with a bunch of points and boundaries of curve graphs, but if you think about how this all worked, I'm taking a bunch of disjoint subsurfaces and maybe just breaking more and more disjoint subsurfaces. Okay. Now that I've done this, I want to define for you this. I should do this somewhere that makes sense to do. Okay. Point in the boundary of the mapping class group is given by the following. Okay, so it's the form, it's going to be some formal linear combination of some stuff, and I'm going to write down an equation and then tell you what the stuff in the equation is. So here I have P is the sum over some y and some support set. So the support set for P is the collection of pairwise disjoint subsurfaces. The alpha y, these guys are numbers between 0 and 1 with their sum. So I take the sum over all these y's, and the sum of the alpha y's equals 1, and then lambda y is a point, and the boundary of the curved graph of y. Okay. So as I was saying, that if you're heading out toward infinity, eventually you should end up with pairwise, a collection of points and boundaries of curved graphs, where the points come from pairwise disjoint collections of subsurfaces. What are these coefficients for? Well, these coefficients are there to help make the topology, which I don't really want to tell you about, this is nasty, make some sense. But what you should think about maybe is that if I'm heading towards some boundary point along some hierarchy path, and I'm moving through one of these product regions, and these coefficients will basically tell you how, give you some idea of moving, like what's the angle of slope you're moving through when you compare how fast you're moving in one to how fast you're moving in the other. And I think at some point I want to say something about PML, and we'll do that. Oh, yeah, I should make a comment here. The comment is about these product regions again. Is that if you have a right here? No. No? Okay. It's not. If I have the product region, well, what I was saying before, if I have some proper subsurface of y, of S, then in the boundary, I'm going to get something very much like a simplicial join. I'm actually going to get a simplicial join of mapping cluster of y, and then we just do a little sloppy and say the mapping cluster of the complementary subsurfaces of y, which you might have multiple complementary subsurfaces, and I'm just going to take the products here, or the simplicial products, simplicial joins. So I get this big join, and you can see that somehow this is some big simplicial complex. And so you topologize it, it's really disconnected, because if you have subsurfaces, you have 2 points that have that don't have common supports, then they don't have any way of interacting yet. And the topology is supposed to help you do so, but I just don't know how to define it. What's the theorem? Well, first theorem. Again, the Mark Analysis is that you can define this thing for any hyperbolic space, any HHS X. You get some topological space, so there's some topology that exists, and with this topology, Hausdorff is Hausdorff. I should say, there's this topology on this boundary, so that the thing you get is Hausdorff inseparable. And if X is proper, here you should be thinking about the Cayley graph of the group, then boundary actually is a compactification. It's metrizable, so we don't really want to measure this. It's just metrizable for abstract nonsense reasons. In particular, the boundary of the mapping class group is compact. Okay. So I gave you, before here I had a very similar theorem from Gromov about hyperbolic spaces, and if it was proper, then the boundary gave the compactification of the space. So here, let me go back to the list of examples and tell you what happens in each of these, or at least in the ones that matter. So in hyperbolic space, you get the Gromov boundary. In particular, this generalizes the Gromov boundary for a hyperbolic group, and it doesn't really matter what HHS structure you form. For rags, you get, or for a rag, and this homeomorphic cat zero and it's with a retopologized. The retopologized marks some Dirichlet boundary. And you get the same thing. You get something homeomorphic. And the other interesting cases, so I want to spend the rest of the time talking about the mapping cluster for the Teichmore space. With the Teichmore metric, you get something compact. So you get something compact. And for the Peterson metric, it's non-compact. And don't quite know what to do with it yet. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was what can you do with this thing. Somehow my thought experiment went right along. Let me just state some theorems. I'm going to get an element-wise classification. And HHGs, more generally of automorphisms, hyperbolic spaces, and Nielsen-Gersten. So in the case of the mapping cluster, you have the notion of, so in the case of any HHG, you have the notion of, you get finite order, or you get something reducible, or something that's rank 1. And in the case of the mapping cluster, this precisely corresponds to finite order, or reducible, or pseudo-nonstop. Yeah, some subgroup structure theorems. And the two that I just want to mention are you get a coarse rank rigidity theorem. Across it's a key for cat zero cumulative groups. And in the case of the cat zero cumulative groups that the HHG theory covers, it's the same theory. And then, so this is maybe one of the gold standards of subgroup structure theorems in that context. And in the case of the mapping house group, this is omnibus subgroup theorem of handle and motion. And we prove both of these in the general context of hyperbolic groups. There's some other things. Oh, yeah. What's on boundaries? Well, boundary G, the HHS boundary is, or HHG boundary is a model with Poisson boundary. And this is using work of modern Tiozzo, which implies that is the case for the top level curve graph in any HHG structure. But the nice thing about this is that this is a compact model for the Poisson boundary. The last thing I want to talk about is Hurston type models.